We are here today to celebrate the launch of Le Seconde by Angelina Mastrippolito. And I'm just going to read Angie's bio and then we're going to do some questions. I am Angie's publisher, Jessica Mutter, and the founder of Hembury Books. Angelina Mastrippolito grew up among the sugarcane fields of far north Queensland. Her family lived in the small town of Ingham alongside other Italian immigrants. It was in fact known as Little Italy. She went on to become the CEO and COO of a number of superannuation funds. Congratulations, Angie. How are you feeling?
Oh, thank you, Jess. I'm actually feeling quite relieved, and there's part of me that's actually excited. I'm actually at the pointy end, so publishing is a hallmark in itself. So I'm really quite happy.
It is. So you're feeling relieved, are you?
I am, Jess. It's been a very new process for me, but thank you for your help. So I'm relieved that it's now the chance to tell my story.
So many
happy
years
to be in that place.
Yeah, that's amazing. Could you tell viewers about your book?
I always tell people to expect the unexpected with my book, because it is a little bit of a different story. But essentially, it's my story as a second-generation immigrant, navigating that place between two cultures, and also a place where there's conflicting and different expectations about who you should be and what you should do. But apart from that, it's also about a book about me navigating a childhood where my parents and my grandparents had unspoken secrets and unspoken past, and what that was like to be growing up with that. Now, the illuminating of what is unspoken in my parents' past, I think brings the story of Italian immigration into a different light. And so it is very much a different take of that story. So I'm pleased to be able to do that. So, so expect the unexpected with it.
Could you tell viewers about the symbolism of the cover?
I think the cover firstly came from my daughter when she read the book, and she came out to me and said, "Mum, this is a story about you and Nonna, about women." And it really is. So my mother is a central character in this, which I'm actually pleased, because a lot of books about history aren't about women. So I think it's nice to have a woman as a central figure. Now, there's sugarcane fields on either side, and the city in the background, and that gives a sense of place. So I grew up in the sugarcane fields. I'm going towards the city, so that we're sort of going towards a path. Now, part of my story is my grandfather, who came to Australia in 1927, and he didn't actually reunite with my father for 21 years. In those 21 years, they had a completely different experience of World War II. So the two sugarcane fields burning is, in a sense, me and my mother navigating these two characters who came together after so many years, and it was explosive. Their relationship was based on a lot of events in history that affected both of them in different ways. So it's navigating that path together with my mother. Now, there's a part of the book which has the little girl with the pile of straw. And I think the pile of straw is, again, a central character, because it speaks to the expectations on women, especially from those from an Italian background. So I'm carrying that piece of straw. It'd be interesting if I put it down at any point.
And can you tell viewers about the significance of the piece of straw?
Well, my mother, she was an Italian wife, and there was expectations on her. She always used to say to me, out of the blue, when a little girl is born, she's born to be a piece of straw. So the implication of that a girl was born to be walked on. So, which is a very strong statement, but it is very much a reflection of where she was in history, because as I go through in the book, she's a child and a teenager through a period in history in Italy, which is the fascist movement, and a lot of the fascist teaching was the teaching about women and their place in society, and I think that's where she gathered that. There's also many, many years of tradition and the influence of church teachings and things like that, but a lot of that relates to that period in history.
And what prompted you to write a book about your family and your childhood?
I think I actually got very tired of Italian cliches and stereotypes, and I have an Italian name, and I worked in corporate Australia for almost 40 years. And so it was very obvious I was from an Italian background. And I got sick of talking. So the only thing that people would talk to me about are the three Ps: pizza, pasta, and passata making. And I think there's much more to the Italian story than those things. And then speaking about passata making, there's a movie, Looking for Brandy, which I must stress is one of my favourite movies of all time.
Yeah.
But every time I've watched it, because I love it so much, and it has passata making as its central theme, but every time I watch it, there was a strong urge in me that the real story was the story of the nonna. Her story is in the background, but I think there was a sense that we've missed the story here, and the story of the daughter as the second generation, which is in a sense my story. So there was a real sense of, perhaps we need to look at that story, and particularly have stories about Italian women, because I think history has forgotten them and their contribution. So it's getting away from pizza, pasta, and passata making. So,
which are all wonderful things, but they're not exclusively the story.
No, and there's a rich history behind it, and I think we've overlooked that rich history. I'm really pleased to be able to provide a book that delves into it in a more authentic and meaningful way.
Yeah, fuller picture. What did you discover about your parents and grandparents while you were writing the book?
I knew so little about their story, and when you're a child, I knew my parents were in the war, and that's basically it. I knew my grandfather was in an internment camp, but that was basically it. So I had very little about their story, and things would come up here and there, but I think the distraction of childhood and adulthood and trying to make your own way, you basically don't take the time to look, and don't take the time to see. So as I became an adult, and I thought, I really should look at their stories even more. And when my mother died, I found letters and photos, and I found a handwritten note from my father that had been, I don't know why he wrote it, but he was there. And I looked in the National Archives, and I really started to reconstruct it. So what was so striking about what I found was just how much trauma they had experienced before they came to Australia. And I learnt something about this date in history called the 3rd of September 1943, which is the Italian armistice. And it was a date that was so significant in my family. It unleashed trauma everywhere. This is the date that you probably don't learn about in history, that the Italians went from supporting the German forces to supporting the Allies. On that date, my father, who was fighting in the Italian army, was caught in no man's land in Crete at the same time as the butcher of Crete was leading the German forces. And my mother was on this thing called the Gustav Line, which was a line that the Germans established in the south of Abruzzo, where my family comes from. And so the Germans were in the north of that line and the Allies were in the south of that line. And I realised that my mother lived there. And then I discovered so much about how traumatic that was for them. Now, with regard to my grandfather, he was a completely different story. I wrote to the National Archives asking for just an idea of the dates and a little bit in pieces, and they sent me a dossier of 30 pages. So I really learned a lot about my grandfather and just how much he identified with fascism and as the hope for Italy after World War I. And basically, he was a bit of a troublemaker. They wanted to deport him to Japan, of all things, because they saw him as a security risk. So I learned there was a lot of discovery in here, but I also discovered a lot about their characters, and I discovered things about my father and things I just didn't know about, how poetic and lyrical and how, in a sense, soft he could be with my mother, but that was sort of quite invisible to me.
Incredible. The unraveling.
It is the unraveling, and it's and it made me change the way I looked at my past. While I think anyone who's gone through with parents who have been traumatized and come with a little bit of baggage, there was a sense of I don't know how they survived. And a real sense of their courage and their determination and what they actually did sacrifice. Another thing that came through in my discovery and starting to put pieces together was the tyranny of distance and time. And this idea that my father wouldn't see his own father for 21 years. And the only way they communicated was through letters. And that was, we had no phones, no internet. The thing that my mother left Italy, left her entire family, and she would not see them for another 20 years. There is a tyranny of distance and time that I don't think we have a sense of. And it really brought home to me how lonely that must have been for them, and how what a sacrifice it was to leave your country, to go to another country.
And to move to the sugarcane fields of North Queensland. I mean, your parents lived in a chicken incubator for the first year, I believe.
No, that's a different thing, Jessica. But they did live in a shack. So my mother, her first home was a tin shack that had rats and snakes and a dirt floor. So and the heat, and so you come from Italy, and the heat in North Queensland is stifling, humidity, and then she experiences the wet seasons, which is like in a sense of the tropical monsoons and floods,
absolutely,
cyclones. Yeah, they're coming from a completely different country to something which is so foreign to them, without family to support them. So it is a story of significant perseverance and courage.
And what did they make of Australia?
I think because they left in Italy, there was we don't hear a lot about central Italy and what Gustav Line meant there. It was devastated after World War II, so people were starving. There was no food, because the Germans came through and took their food and killed their livestock. So they were actually quite, there was, my mother used to call it the miseria, the misery. So when she came to Australia, she actually took to Australia with a bit of gusto. She, when she was nationalised in 1955, she would call herself a kangaroo of all things. She couldn't speak English, but she called herself a kangaroo. And it was the days when you were nationalised, you had to actually change your citizenship. So she actually became a British subject, and she was almost the same age as the Queen. So she loved the Queen. She loved Queen Elizabeth. Like, as most women of that era, they looked up to Queen Elizabeth as a bit of a role model. So underneath that is like a gratitude of, even though this was a sacrifice, this was really, really hard, but they were so thankful of this opportunity and this new life away from the misery that they came from. So, I think underlying it was just thank you for giving me this opportunity
to live as well, to evade a high risk of harm or death.
Oh, that's right. So it was high risk.
Yeah. Right. And can you tell us about your childhood in Australia, like one of your strongest memories? Or
I think it's a childhood of contrast, tell you what. So I think my favourite memories, and I think the first chapter of the book goes into it, is swimming in the Anaranch River, which is an estuary. And it's not like pristine, by the way. It's a saltwater estuary. So it's murky and all these things, but it actually had this sort of sand stretch of sand that we called our own beach. So we'd all go down there and we'd take relatives down there. Like, if people came to visit, we'd take them down there and we'd all go swimming, which was a lot of fun, except for the fact that there were actually crocodiles, which were being culled, by the way. So there wasn't as many as there is now, but interestingly,
you only need one to have an awful day.
Yeah, and there were history of people getting taken.
A little girl.
So that's right. That is very much a vivid message, particularly the fact that we took visitors there and we took all our relations there to swim as well. So it was actually an amazing time. I loved growing up on the farm. We didn't have I think if you go into the story, we didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't actually have toys. So my parents didn't give us toys, but we had a whole farm. Like it's a childhood that I'm really appreciative of. On the other side of that, we had my grandfather living with us and my father, and so it is a childhood of contrasts. So
It's
having
fascinating.
this 250 acres to play in with coming home and that sort of conflict between them.
Could you please tell us about being a woman with Italian heritage working in corporate Australia in the 1980s and 90s?
There are actually two parts to that question. So I think I'll start with being a woman. So I actually joined a very male-dominated profession, and I really didn't know what I was. It was very naive for me, and I should have perhaps done my research. So there wasn't many men in the profession, but it was actually a time for women where there was really preconceived notions of what a professional looked like. And believe me, it didn't look like a 4'11" Italian woman who wore skirts. So there was this notion of gravitas. And so you didn't actually fit the description of what a professional should look like. So there was a degree of unconscious bias there as to, being recognised and sort of for successes and things like that. So, and there were a lot of barriers for women at that time, particularly for women who wanted to have children. So the corporate world hadn't really set up a structure for women to progress the ranks while being mothers. And one of my worst experiences was when I had my first child, and I came back from maternity leave with my job restructured. My clients had been reassigned, and I was in a completely different role. So it was a learning curve for everybody. And I think there was some court cases at that time as well, which really started to put stakes in the ground as to what women should expect. Now, being an Italian, and also there was an issue with working part-time, and there was a prevailing view of, it's a really old expression, but it was so common, part-time, part-mind, that if you were part-time, you weren't completely committed to your job. That's changed, thank you. But thank you very much. But, that was very much prevalent. As an Italian woman, when I started, Australian corporate was very monocultural. Like it was, having an Italian name was like, and people used to comment on my Italian name a lot. So there was a real need to fit in. And now bear in mind that you're coming from decades where Australia's immigration policy was about assimilation, not integration. So the sense of fitting in, changing yourself to fit in was very prevalent, and it was very much in corporate as well. So, but as long as I didn't talk about my history, my heritage, and I sort of, was the same as everybody else and talked about the same things, and it was all okay. It fit in. I was able to fit in. But also, surprisingly, no one ever asked about my heritage. No one was curious about it. And that's where the pizzas, pasta, and it was like there was a sense of this is what we think Italian heritage is. So I think that hopefully will change in the future, where we don't provide lip service to people from other cultures. And, there's an expression of, we won't get along. It's hard to get along if you don't understand me. So it's going beyond sort of the cliches and the stereotypes to have a real understanding of multicultural Australia and what it is like as a multicultural woman.
Why do you think it took a long time for you to identify with your Italian heritage?
I think, again, that's this idea of growing up at a time of assimilation rather than integration, because I was growing up at a time where history was all an Australian history. All I learned about was Australian history. All I saw on the media was Australian history.
White Australian history too.
That's right. So there was a sense that my history as a minority at that particular time, I think, talking 60s and 70s, was completely irrelevant. And also I grew up in farm, Queensland, and there was always this sense that the real Australia was down south, that my little Italy was not the real Australia, it was somewhere else. And there was no, and even when I came to South, down south and started work, there was nothing that said to me I was part of Australia. So, so there was a sense that I had to change myself to fit into what I saw around me. So, but I think that changed as I grew older, and I think going to Italy that last time, and I really started to feel a connection to Italian culture at that point. And I really started to think about my family and my parents. And I really started to think, there is something that is not right here. There is something about my identity that is not authentic, that hasn't recognised a very significant part of my history and my past. And how can you be authentic if you don't own your own history? So that was very much a light bulb moment. So I think I've come to now to a point where in writing this book, I'm sort of putting a stake in the ground that being Australian is not about embracing Anglo-Saxon culture, but there is a continuum there where I can, be part of Australia and still embrace my history and my heritage, because in a sense, I'm Australian.
In every sense, Australian.
Exactly. My mother was actually a British subject, but that's interesting. So being Australian isn't about denying my history or my heritage. There is a place where both can coexist, and it is part of actually an incredibly rich fabric of Australia. And we need to embrace that, because unless we embrace that, we really won't understand each other. We won't have that sense of what a new Australia looks like and is and feels like.
Yeah. And what I love about your book is that you're looking at the second generation.
That's right.
I have not heard of that depicted in a book. I'm sure there's many academic studies, but we should be talking about it because we are a country of second and third and fourth generation immigrants. We do carry trauma, some of us.
Exactly. And I think, there is and a lot of the people who come to Australia, a lot of immigrants have escaped something. And I'm very curious. I tend to, when I meet people, will ask about their stories, and I'm usually very, very moved by their stories. But we don't hear about them, and there's an expectation that as a second generation that we just move on from it. As the first generation, even, we move on from it. But there is a trauma associated with things that are unspoken. And that's why I think it's really important to speak about these things, because we will only understand, again, as I say, we'll only understand each other unless we speak about where we've come from and things that are in our past that may be difficult to talk about, but are important to hear.
Do you think Australia has a long way to go in terms of being genuinely diverse and inclusive?
I think we've come an incredibly long way. And I think the recent election results has shown that we do value people being inclusive, which is a wonderful thing. I do think, though, we are still missing representation. There is a sense that we are accepting of other cultures, and there's this beauty of, other cultures being able to still continue their culture in Australia. But I have a sense that there is that other cultures have not entered the mainstream, that we are embracing other cultures, but on the side, and rather than bringing that into the mainstream. And I say that because we are very much lacking in representation of multiculturalism on boards, in the media, even in literature. So I think there is a real need to give space in the mainstream, in the main game, rather than giving space on the side as something that we think is lovely and really wonderful, but not really the heart of Australia. So representation is really critical then. I think we have a way to go.
Well, you're going to be a very powerful advocate for it. And I'm happy that you're working with your book publicist, Nicole Webb, to really get the word out there. And so lots of people can discover your book.
Thank you, Jess. And I really thank you for your help as well. I think it is very daunting, the publishing process, and I'm incredibly fortunate to have you on board. So thank you very much.
It's very enjoyable, hasn't it?
It has been. I think we've had some interesting to and fro's, and designing the cover, I think, was an interesting process as well. So I'm very, very delighted with the
result. It's very beautiful and unique. It's unique. So what is next for you, Angie?
I think I've got a few book launches coming up, which I'm looking forward to. So I've got a book launch party on Friday, which, again, as an Italian, I'm always worried about the food. And I've got a book launch in my hometown, and my publicist is looking at sort of other opportunities. I've got an interview lined up with Bill Cruz, and hopefully some other interviews lined up. Yeah, so I'm very excited. It's just lovely to be at this stage of my life and to be able to be doing these things, and it's a real honor to be able to speak about my family story. So I'm just so happy that this opportunity has presented itself to me.
Well, you created the opportunity, Angie, because you did the work and all the research, and it must be deep because it's so deeply personal. There's nothing more personal than this. To have that for other people to share must be a really good feeling.
It is. And if I can even just shed some light on the immigration story and create a more understanding of that, I think I've achieved my purpose here. And we live in a wonderful country which is very culturally diverse, and probably the luckiest country in the world from that perspective. But there is a rich fabric there, and I don't think we've woven that fabric as yet. And once we do, I think it's going to be an incredible Australia.
Yeah. So congratulations on the publication of Les Seconde, Inheriting the Unspoken, a second generation immigrant story. Thanks a lot, Angie.
Thank you.